Hello everyone and welcome back into another edition here of the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I, as always, am your host, Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in on this lovely Thursday afternoon, which have another great show ahead for you today. Starting off by taking a look at the NBA's top rookies. We're at the midway point of the season thus far, and I want to count down the top 5 rookies thus far in the NBA. They'll be doing our weekly NHL power rankings, see if there are any changes from the first one from last week. Then we're going to be doing a little bit of a belated look at my all-college football playoff team, at least offensively. A lot of great performances to reminisce about there. And then we're going to be continuing our What's Next series for several CFP teams. Today, looking at 3, Tennessee, Clemson, and Georgia specifically. Before we get into any of that fun stuff, I do want to remind you, as always, to like, follow, and subscribe to the network and shows around it if you haven't done so already and want to keep up to date with all our new content. But if you want to contribute and interact with our shows a little bit more directly while we are live streaming, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. As always, the best way to get your opinions, feedback, and inputs on air. You can also contribute through our website, gsmcspodcast.net as well. Any tips or donations you decide to leave are genuinely appreciated by all if you feel so inclined, and it just makes the show that much more interactive, but also much better in my opinion, as I get to hear your opinions about the show and not just ramble on about my own most of the time. Without further ado, let's jump right into our first segment of today's show. Let's talk some rookies, specifically in the NBA. Now, a lot of people said that this year's draft was going to be weak. And in many ways, it has proven to be so, because none of the guys in this top 5 list are superstar contributors, much like what Victor Wembanyama has become from last year's draft. But there are still rotational pieces that I feel like can contribute to their teams. They just need to up their traits a little bit that they're lacking in, but also understand their roles a bit better. Others are perhaps outperforming expectations, so to speak. But most of these players, what I find is that all of them really have a defined role that isn't necessarily one that speaks to even contributions night in, night out. They all have a role to play in their squad, so to speak. So no one really stands out as, say, the focal point of this class. No one really stands out as a true superstar, much like what Victor did last year. But all of these guys are incredible athletes in their own right, in their own roles, and they definitely have the space to become superstars. But right now are kind of figuring things out as they go along, and they could be playing on teams not necessarily fit for, forward progress just yet. But without further ado, let's jump right into the top 5 rookies of the season thus far. Starting off at number 5, a young man who I feel like has very high hopes in the San Antonio Spurs team out of UConn. Really interesting point guard in Stephon Castle. He has all the talent. He has all the ability. He has a great motor. I'm very familiar with him from his UConn days, as I watch a lot of Big East basketball as a Xavier fan. So I'm familiar that he has the ability and traits needed to handle one of the most difficult positions at this level. Ultimately, he hasn't necessarily been too efficient, and he definitely drives to the rim a lot more than you would like out of someone on a team really looking to build upon their success this season. And I feel like eventually he becomes someone who gives them some nice floor spacing, the ability to potentially extend his range, but right now he is a very raw product because he has dunked more often than not when in fact he could, take the mid-range shot, find a guy in the perimeter, find a guy down low. So ultimately he needs to work some things into his game, but the good news about him is that he's now a dunk contest participant, and he does have that initial drive to really amp up this young Spurs team, because eventually Chris Paul is not going to be the number one point guard option for you anymore. The Stephon Castle is going to have to step into his shoes. And I think that he can do it, but there definitely are some tweaks he needs to make that will get him to that point. But he sits at number 5 right now, and he definitely could see his star rise in the coming years. Then, at the number 4 spot, a guy who a lot of people were looking forward to in the league, seeing as to how his height could definitely positively impact his play, and that is Mr. Zach Edey. And he has been playing fairly enough basketball to warrant me saying that his first NBA season has been a success, but the Memphis Grizzlies are very deep in their front court. Obviously, we talk about Jaren Jackson Jr. becoming more of a go-to option, much like we did yesterday as we were talking about them on our power rankings, but his minutes often fluctuate in terms of how he plays. He's in a rotation with guys like Brandon Clark, Jay Huff, so he doesn't necessarily see much action. But when he does, I feel like he's most effective in terms of drawing fouls and being a big presence down low for this Memphis Grizzlies team. I feel like, his physicality is one thing that's going to be tested very often as his career goes on, seeing as to how his height might impact his movement defending more versatile big men, especially a couple nights ago when he was going up against Karl Anthony Towns for a couple of minutes. But I do believe that Zach Edey is more than just a tree down low. He has the skill necessary to draw players into him, and that could definitely help out this very expansive Memphis offense in years to come, in that he can distribute the basketball from down low to their explosive dynamic weapons in the backcourt and ultimately create even more volatility in what's already a very fantastic Memphis offense. So I feel like Zach Edey is going to be a confusing player to monitor over the next couple of years because of the fact that he might not play as often as you would like him to, but he is a very intriguing piece from this class, being the number 9 overall pick. And I feel like because it's Memphis, he'll have a lot of talent around him so that his effectiveness down low doesn't go underrated and underappreciated at that matter. But ultimately, he sits at number 4 on this list. I hope he has a nice end to his rookie season because I think he can see his star rise as well. But then at number 3, another guy down low, big man out of Baylor, playing pretty well considering how the Pelicans season has gone, but not necessarily over the past couple of games. Yves Missi, I think that he is a bright spot for the Pelicans because of what he brings down low and his effectiveness, but I don't necessarily think he's been as efficient as he would like over the recent games, not scoring any points in their last meeting against Dallas. But he is someone who is valued on the boards, both offensively and defensively, very aggressive down low. But I do think that in terms of improvement, I feel like he needs to be more aggressive in terms of second chance points and even on the defensive end, really making sure that the rim is protected. And he's doing a good job of that thus far, but combining it with a little bit more offensive production would certainly help him gain a nicer place in this Pelicans rotation. Because I feel like the Pelicans don't necessarily know who they're relying on, whether it's Zion or his myriad number of injuries, Brandon Ingram, who hasn't necessarily blossomed into the best of second options, and then CJ McCollum, who still has his three-point shot, but can't necessarily be expected to carry this team at his age. So Yves Missi is someone who I feel like has got it down pat defensively, but offensively may need to see some more additions to his game. And so I feel like him and Edey are very similar in that they can provide necessary spacing, but ultimately the reason why I think Missi is a little bit higher is because of his impact in terms of what the Pelicans might need going forward. Because Zach Edey might not be as necessary, quote unquote, to Memphis's rise in the West, whereas Yves Missi definitely is a project who can see his star grow even more should he improve along with this Pelican squad. So I'm really intrigued to see the development of Yves Messi at the number 3 spot. Then the number 2 spot, perhaps the most unexpected of rankings here, the number 39 overall pick out of Washington State, Jalen Wells, also of the Memphis Grizzlies as well. This is a young man who made the most out of his situation, shooting pretty well from 3 at 38.6%. He's very fascinating 3-and-D kind of player, a lot of energy and physicality, but a lot of Memphis people within the organization, his head coach, the front office, a lot of people really love this guy. And I feel like even though his usage might fluctuate a little bit, and he certainly is going to have to struggle to get more minutes, seeing as to how they have a lot of depth in their backcourt, he has made the most of them. And he's definitely guarded some very tough players over the past couple of weeks. And I feel like being able to guard the NBA's best will only see his star rise more as he learns more about himself as the Memphis Grizzlies play tougher and tougher opponents. So I really think that this kid's been a steal at the draft, and I really think his star will ultimately be shining bright for Memphis a couple years down the road when he gets a bigger role in this offense. But the number 1 overall player in this ranking might drop because he's now injured and could miss a significant amount of time. But Alexander Sarr, and he's an interesting case because he's perhaps the worst team out of all these players, and the Washington Wizards certainly need a lot more around him to supplement him. But I do think the best moments we've seen of Sarr are his solidity on the defensive end in terms of leading, I believe, rookies in blocks. He's fascinating at the rim, getting 52% of his shots. But I do feel like he needs the better finishing on the offensive side of the basketball. And right now, his injury status is definitely up in the air as well. They need a Sarr to be healthy if I'm the Wizards, but B, playing significant minutes against these elite teams to get going. So I feel like Sarr, from where he was when he was November's Rookie of the Month to now, we've seen a little bit more inconsistencies, and we're going to have to see how he comes back from this injury. But I really am fascinated by him because out of all these guys, he has the least amount of talent around him and is expected to be the superstar of his team. But right now, he's really struggling. So I could see him drop down these rankings a little bit as the season goes on. But ultimately, I think this is a very well-rounded list. A lot of big men, as it is a big men's league, but also a couple of steals on this list as well, and a couple of guys who just need to iron out the kinks to really get involved with their teams. But ultimately, let me know what you think of the comments below about this list, because coming next we transition over to the NHL, doing my weekly power rankings there, who will be at number 1 this week right after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.